I am Kendra, 32 years old, and last night my family finally pushed me too far. At 2 a.m., my younger sister stole my car keys and totaled a brand new SUV into a lamppost. My mother did not ask if I was okay. Instead, she slapped me across the face and screamed that it was my fault. I stood there tasting blood and I almost laughed, because they had no idea that the car my sister destroyed wasn't mine. It was my mother's uninsured Cadillac. Before I tell you how I let them dig their own grave, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video if you have ever been the scapegoat for a golden child. The nightmare began 2 hours earlier. The sound of shattering glass and twisting metal jolted me from a deep sleep. I sat up in bed, heart pounding against my ribs, disoriented by the flashing blue and red lights dancing across my ceiling. I threw on a silk robe and ran down the marble staircase of our Buckhead estate. The heavy oak front door was already wide open. Outside, the humid Atlanta air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. My mother, Patricia, was standing on the porch in her nightgown, her chest heaving. Before I could even ask what happened, her hand connected with my cheek. A sharp, stinging slap that echoed in the silence of the night. "You irresponsible, selfish girl," she shrieked, her eyes wild with rage. "You left your keys on the foyer table again, didn't you? Ebony took them. Your sister is in an ambulance because of you." I looked past her manicured finger pointing at my face. Wrapped around the neighborhood entrance gate was a twisted heap of black metal. Steam hissed from the crushed radiator. Police officers were setting up flares, their radios crackling with static. My mother grabbed my shoulders, shaking me violently. "Stop staring and listen to me. If she has a scratch on her, I will never forgive you. Why can't you be more careful? Why do you always try to sabotage her?" The logic was dizzying. My 28-year-old sister, a grown woman, had broken into my purse, stolen my keys, driven drunk, and crashed. Yet in Patricia's twisted world, I was the villain for existing. I touched my burning cheek, looking at the wreckage. I did not say a word. I just let the flashing lights illuminate the disaster. My mother was so busy screaming at me that she hadn't walked closer to the crash site. She hadn't seen the license plate yet. I swallowed the copper taste of blood in my mouth and remained silent. I knew that by sunrise the real crash would happen, and it would destroy my mother's bank account, not mine. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead, adding a headache to the stinging sensation still lingering on my cheek. I expected to find my sister fighting for her life. Instead, I found Ebony sitting upright on a gurney behind a thin curtain, checking her reflection in her iPhone camera. There was not a single scratch on her face. The airbags in the SUV had done their job, perfectly cushioning her from the consequences of her own stupidity. She was sobbing, but I knew my sister well enough to know the difference between genuine pain and a performance for the nursing staff. Before I could even step forward to ask the doctor for an update, a hand grabbed my arm and spun me around. It was Kyle, my brother-in-law. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of stale beer and desperation. "You have some nerve showing up here," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "This is all your fault, Kendra. You know Ebony has been struggling with her sobriety. You know she is fragile right now. Leaving your keys out on the foyer table was not an accident. It was a trap. You wanted her to fail. You wanted her to take the car so you could play the superior sister again." I stared at him, genuinely baffled by the mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion. "I was asleep, Kyle," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. It was 2 in the morning. I did not force her to break into my purse. I did not pour vodka down her throat. And I certainly did not tell her to drive my car into a lamppost. Kyle stepped closer, invading my personal space, his finger pointing in my face. "Stop acting innocent. You are jealous because she has a personality, and you are just a bitter workaholic. If she goes to jail because of your negligence, I will sue you for every dime you have." That was when my mother, Patricia, stepped between us, but she was not there to defend me. She turned her back to Kyle and fixed me with a gaze that was cold and calculating. She gripped my shoulders, her nails digging into my skin through my silk robe. Listen to me very carefully, Kendra. We do not have time for your arguments. The police officers are finishing their report at the front desk, and they will be coming back here any minute to take a statement. She lowered her voice to a terrifying whisper. Ebony is on probation from her incident last year. If they find out she was behind the wheel while intoxicated, she goes to prison. Not county jail, Kendra. Prison. She will lose her freedom. She will lose her reputation. You, on the other hand, have a spotless record. You are a respectable accountant. A first-time offense for you would be a slap on the wrist. A fine. Maybe some community service. I pulled back, realizing with horror what she was asking. You want me to say I was driving? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You want me to take a DU I charge for her? Patricia's eyes hardened. I am not asking you. I am telling you. You are the older sister. It is your job to protect her. Besides, the car is totaled. The insurance will cover it if you were driving. If they know Ebony took it without permission, we get nothing. So fix your face, dry your eyes, and go tell those officers that you lost control of the vehicle. Do it for this family, or do not bother coming back home. 2 uniformed officers stepped through the partition before I could answer my mother's ultimatum. Officer Miller, a man who looked like he had seen too many accidents that night, held a clipboard. We need to establish who was operating the vehicle, he said, his pen hovering over the paper. Patricia squeezed my arm, a silent command to fall on my sword. She looked at the officer with a practiced smile. My daughter is just a little shaken up, officer. She was just about to tell you that she lost control of the car on the wet pavement. I stepped away from her grip, smoothing out the wrinkles in my silk robe. Actually, officer, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, I have no idea who was driving that car, or whose car it even is. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that it was not mine. Patricia's eyes widened, her face twisting into a mask of confusion and fury. Kendra, stop this nonsense immediately. Ebony took your keys off the foyer table. We all know it is your Range Rover wrapped around that pole. Stop wasting the officer's time. I calmly reached into the deep pocket of my robe and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen and held it up for the officer and my family to see. The GPS tracking app for my vehicle glowed with a steady blue dot. As you can see, I said, my Range Rover is currently parked in spot B4 of this hospital's parking lot. I drove myself here 10 minutes ago. The engine is still warm if you would like to check. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to Ebony. Kyle looked from the phone to me, his mouth hanging open. But Ebony took the keys, he stammered. I saw her take the fob with the Range Rover logo. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. Yes, she did take a key that looked like mine. You see, after I noticed cash missing from my wallet last week, I became suspicious. I swapped the internal circuit board of my key fob into an old generic shell, and I put the circuit board for Mom's new car inside my Range Rover shell. I turned to my mother, whose face had gone from red to a ghostly pale. So when Ebony stole the keys off the table, she did not steal my car. She stole the spare key to your brand new limited edition Cadillac Escalade. The one you just bought yesterday. The one you haven't even added to the insurance policy yet. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Officer Miller looked at his notes, and then back at the wreckage report. That explains why the VIN number didn't match the registration we pulled for Kendra Vance. The vehicle in the crash is indeed an unregistered Cadillac. I dropped my real keys back into my pocket, the metal clinking softly. The trap had snapped shut. I wasn't the one in trouble. Patricia was. And she had just realized that saving her golden child was about to cost her a fortune she didn't have. The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than the steel frame of the crushed Cadillac outside. My mother stared at the cheap plastic key fob in her hand, as if it were a venomous snake. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The realization hit her in waves. The twisted metal wrapped around the lamppost was not my insured vehicle. It was her brand new $120,000 purchase that she had driven off the lot less than 24 hours ago. Officer Miller cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Well, Mrs. Vance, since the vehicle belongs to you and your daughter, Ebony was the driver, we will need to process the accident report with those details. Unless, of course, you wish to report the vehicle as stolen. Patricia looked at Ebony, who was now wailing loudly behind the curtain, terrified of going back to jail. My mother shook her head slowly, defeated. No, officer. She had permission. It was an accident. By the next morning, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of financial ruin. I sat at the kitchen island sipping black coffee, watching my mother pace back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. She had been on hold with the insurance company for 40 minutes. Her voice switched between sickly sweet and hysterical. Yes, I understand, she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. But I just bought the car yesterday. There is a grace period for new vehicle purchases. You have to cover it. She put the phone on speaker, hoping that Kyle or I could offer some solution. The insurance agent's voice filled the room, calm and professional, the voice of someone who denies claims for a living. Ma'am, while it is true that new vehicles have a grace period for coverage, that coverage extends from your existing policy. And I am looking at your policy right now. There is a significant problem. Patricia stopped pacing. What problem? We have full coverage. We have been with you for 20 years. The agent sighed. Mrs. Vance, the problem is not the car. It is the driver. According to the excluded driver affidavit you signed 3 years ago, Ebony Vance is specifically listed as an excluded driver on your household policy. This was a condition for renewal after her previous DUIs. The document states clearly that if Ebony Vance operates any vehicle insured under this policy, all coverage is void. Liability, collision, comprehensive, all of it. The room spun. I watched Kyle sink into a chair, his face buried in his hands. My mother let out a strangled sound. But it was an emergency, she screamed at the phone. She needed to go to the store. Does that not count? I am afraid not, the agent replied, unmoved. The exclusion is absolute. Because Ebony was driving, we are denying the claim in its entirety. You are personally liable for the towing, the storage fees, the damage to the city lamppost, and the total loss of the Cadillac. We will be sending a formal letter of denial today. Have a good day, Mrs. Vance. The line went dead. My mother stared at the phone, her $100,000 asset, now nothing more than a pile of scrap metal that she would be paying for years to come. I took another sip of my coffee. The nightmare had just begun. Officer Miller watched the color drain from my mother's face as he presented her with the reality of the situation. Mrs. Vance, we have a problem, he said, his voice void of sympathy. Since you are the legal owner of the vehicle and your daughter Ebony was behind the wheel, we need a formal statement. You have 2 options, and neither of them is pleasant. Option 1 is that you report the vehicle as stolen. If Ebony took the keys without your consent, that is grand theft auto. Given the value of the Cadillac, it is a felony charge. She will be arrested tonight, her probation will be revoked, and she will likely face a significant prison sentence. Ebony let out a high-pitched wail from the hospital bed. Mom, please, I can't go to prison. I'm too pretty for prison. Patricia looked at her golden child, then back at the officer, her hands trembling. And option 2, she whispered. Option 2, the officer continued, is that you state you gave her permission to drive. In that case, she won't be charged with theft. However, since she was driving on a suspended license and under the influence, she will still face charges for that. Furthermore, as the owner who entrusted the vehicle to an unlicensed driver, you will be fully liable for all civil damages. That includes the city lamppost, the towing, the storage, and the complete loss of your uninsured vehicle. The room was thick with tension. It was a choice between her daughter's freedom and her own financial security. For Patricia, it wasn't even a choice. She took a deep breath and straightened her spine. She had permission, she lied, her voice shaking slightly. I gave her the keys. It was a misunderstanding. Officer Miller nodded slowly, closing his notebook. Very well. We will process the paperwork accordingly. Expect a court summons in the mail. As soon as the officers left the room, the atmosphere shifted from fear to pure, unadulterated rage. Patricia spun around to face me, her eyes blazing. "This is on you," she hissed, stepping into my personal space until I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the hospital's antiseptic. "You did this on purpose. If you hadn't played that little trick with the key fobs, Ebony would have taken your Range Rover. Your insurance would have covered it. We would just be dealing with a simple repair bill. But because you had to be so selfish, so paranoid, now I am on the hook for everything." I stared at her, incredulous. "You are blaming me because I stopped my sister from stealing my car?" I asked. Patricia didn't blink. "I am blaming you for ruining this family. And since this is your fault, you are going to fix it. I expect you to pay for the replacement of my Cadillac. You have that fancy job, you have savings. You will write me a check for $80,000 to cover the damages, or so help me God, Kendra, you will regret the day you were born." The audacity was breathtaking. She had just chosen to save a criminal and was now demanding the victim pay for the privilege. I looked at her, then at Kyle and Ebony, who were nodding in agreement. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel hurt. I felt nothing but cold resolve. I looked at the three people standing before me. My mother, my sister, and her husband, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. For years I had been the fixer, the one who paid the bail, the one who covered the rent, the one who smoothed things over. But looking at Patricia's demanding face, something inside me finally snapped. "No," I said simply. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Patricia blinked as if I had spoken a foreign language. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice rising an octave. "I am not paying $80,000 or any dollars for a car I did not wreck." I repeated, my voice steady. "I did not give Ebony permission to drive. I did not tell you to buy an uninsured luxury vehicle. And I certainly am not responsible for your poor financial decisions. This is your mess. You clean it up." Kyle stepped forward, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. He grabbed the back of a hospital chair, his knuckles white. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Kendra? You think you can just walk away from family? If you don't write that check, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I will ruin you. I will go on every social media platform. I will call your boss. I will make sure you have no friends left in this city. You will regret crossing us." I looked him up and down, unimpressed by his posturing. Kyle was a man who had never worked a hard day in his life, living off my mother's retirement fund and his wife's delusions. "Go ahead, Kyle," I said, checking my watch. "But before you start your smear campaign, you might want to figure out how you are getting home. My car is for authorized drivers only." Patricia gasped. "You are leaving us here in the middle of the night. We don't have a car. The Cadillac is towed. How are we supposed to get back to Buckhead?" I shrugged, adjusting my purse on my shoulder. "That sounds like a personal problem. Uber exists. Or maybe you can call one of your country club friends to pick you up." "Oh wait, it's 4 a.m., isn't it? They might be sleeping." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit doors. Behind me, I heard Ebony start to scream my name, a string of profanities following me down the sterile hallway. Kyle was shouting about lawsuits. Patricia was crying about how she raised an ungrateful monster. I didn't look back once. I walked out into the cool night air, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me, cutting off their noise. I climbed into my Range Rover, my safe, undamaged, insured Range Rover, and locked the doors. As I drove away, leaving them stranded on the curb under the flickering hospital lights, I felt the first true moment of peace I had felt in years. But I knew Kyle wasn't bluffing. The war had officially begun. I woke up the next morning, not to the sound of an alarm, but to a phone that was vibrating so intensely it was dancing across my nightstand. I picked it up, expecting a groveling apology from my mother, or perhaps a threat from Kyle. Instead, I saw hundreds of notifications flooding my screen. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. They were all blowing up. My stomach churned as I opened the first link sent by a concerned friend. It was a video posted by Kyle titled, "The Heartless Sister Wealth Over Family." The video was a masterclass in manipulation. Kyle had edited the footage from the hospital waiting room. He had cut out the part where they demanded I take the blame for a felony. He cut out the part where they admitted to insurance fraud. All the world saw was a tearful Ebony lying in a hospital bed, looking small and fragile, followed by a clip of me standing in my expensive silk robe, looking down at them. He had enhanced the audio of me saying, "I am not paying $80,000. That sounds like a personal problem." The caption read, "My wife almost died last night in a horrific crash. Her own sister, a millionaire accountant, refused to help with medical bills, or even give us a ride home. She left us stranded at 4 a.m. because she cares more about her bank account than human life. Please share to expose this cruelty." The video had gone viral. 2 million views in 6 hours. The comments section was a cesspool of hatred. People who didn't know me were calling me a monster, a narcissist, and worse. Doxing threats were already appearing. I scrolled through the vitriol, my hands shaking slightly. It wasn't just strangers. I saw comments from people I knew, neighbors, former classmates. And then the text messages started coming in from the church ladies. The church ladies were the unofficial moral police of our community. Led by Mrs. Jenkins, a woman who wore hats bigger than her heart, they wielded gossip like a weapon. My phone pinged with a message from her Kendra. "I just saw the video. I am praying for your soul. How could you abandon your mother and sister in their time of need? The Bible says to honor thy family. We are having a prayer circle for Ebony tonight. We hope you will come and repent for your hardness of heart." I didn't reply. I knew better than to argue with people who had already decided I was the villain. Kyle had played his hand perfectly. He knew he couldn't beat me in a court of law, so he was trying to destroy me in the court of public opinion. He wanted to shame me into submission to make the social pressure so unbearable that I would write that check just to make it stop. I set my phone down, the screen still lighting up with notifications of hate. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to defend myself online so they could twist my words again. But as a forensic accountant, I knew one truth: numbers don't lie, but people do. And Kyle had just left a digital footprint that was going to lead me right to his throat. I wasn't going to comment. I was going to investigate. The consequences of Kyle's smear campaign did not wait long to manifest in the real world. By 9 in the morning, the digital poison had leaked into the pristine glass corridors of Sterling and Associates. As I walked to my office, the usual morning greetings were replaced by averted eyes and hushed whispers. My administrative assistant looked at me with a mixture of pity and judgment as she handed me a message slip. "Mr. Henderson wants to see you. Immediately." David Henderson was the managing partner of the firm, a man who cared about two things: billable hours and reputation. I walked into his corner office to find him standing by the window, his back to me. On his desk, his iPad was paused on a freeze frame of Kyle's video. The caption, "Wealth Over Family," seemed to burn a hole in the mahogany surface. David turned around, his expression unreadable. "We audit Fortune 500 companies, Kendra. We handle sensitive financial data for some of the most powerful families in Georgia. Our currency is trust." I stood straight, refusing to shrink. "That video is a fabrication, David. My brother-in-law is attempting to extort me because I refuse to participate in insurance fraud." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "I believe you, Kendra. You are one of my best forensic accountants. But the truth matters less than perception right now. Clients are calling. They are asking why our senior associate is trending on Twitter as a heartless monster. We cannot have this distraction during tax season." He slid a form across the desk. It was a request for administrative leave. "Take a week, Kendra. Go home. Sort out your family mess. Make this disappear. If the noise continues, we will have to have a very different conversation about your future here." I looked at the paper. It was not a request. It was an order. I signed it with a steady hand. Understood, I said. I will clean up the trash. I packed my laptop and left the building. I did not go home to cry. I did not go to my mother's house to beg for forgiveness. I went to my favorite coffee shop, ordered a triple shot espresso, and opened my laptop. If Kyle and Patricia wanted to make this a public war, I would treat it like a professional engagement. I cracked my knuckles and logged into the secure server I used for background checks. I stopped being Kendra Vance, the daughter and sister. I became Kendra Vance, the certified fraud examiner. I pulled up the family tree and began to map out the financial ecosystem of the people trying to destroy me. I accessed the joint accounts I had set up years ago to help my mother manage her bills. I pulled credit reports for Kyle, Ebony, and Patricia. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and titled it, The Audit. The screen glowed with rows of data, and for the first time in 24 hours I smiled. They thought they could bury me with emotional manipulation. But they had forgotten that every lie leaves a financial footprint. And I was the best tracker in the business. The sanctuary of my home had been breached. When I returned from my self-imposed exile at the coffee shop, I found the driveway blocked by a U-Haul trailer. Inside the house looked like a fraternity after a chaotic party. Cardboard boxes blocked the hallways, and the air smelled of stale pizza and Kyle's overpowering body spray. My mother, Patricia, stood in the foyer acting as the general of this new occupation. "Your sister and Kyle are moving in," she announced, daring me to object. "Their landlord was unreasonable about the rent. They need a place to stay until the lawsuit against you is settled." I almost laughed at the absurdity. They were suing me yet sleeping down the hall. I walked into the kitchen, my safe haven, only to find it desecrated. My carefully organized refrigerator had been ransacked. The rows of organic meal prep containers I spent Sunday afternoons preparing were gone. In their place were half-empty energy drinks and takeout leftovers. I found Kyle sitting at the island digging a fork into my last portion of grilled salmon and quinoa. He didn't even pause. "Hey, Kenny," he mumbled through a mouthful of my food. "We were out of groceries. Hope you don't mind." I stared at the empty glass containers piled in the sink, unwashed and greasy. "That was my food for the week, Kyle?" I said, my voice tight. Patricia walked in waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, stop it, Kendra. It is just food. Your sister and her husband are going through a trauma. The least you can do is share your abundance. You can always buy more. You can afford it." I retreated upstairs, needing to wash the image of Kyle eating my lunch out of my mind. But the invasion had spread upward. The door to my private bathroom, which I always kept closed, was wide open. Steam billowed out. Inside, Ebony was wearing my bathrobe, her hair wrapped in my towel. She was standing at the sink applying my La Mer face cream, the jar that cost $300 and lasted me 6 months, onto her legs. She was scooping it out like it was cheap drugstore lotion. I stood frozen in the doorway. "Ebony," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage, "that is not body lotion." Ebony glanced at me in the mirror, unbothered. "Relax. My skin is so dry from the stress of the accident. You have so much stuff, Kendra. Why are you always so stingy?" She dipped her fingers back into the jar, scraping the bottom. I walked over and snatched the empty glass jar from her hand. "Get out," I whispered. "Get out of my bathroom." That evening, the tension exploded over dinner pizza that Patricia had ordered using my credit card on file. "We need to talk about the bills," Patricia announced, wiping grease from her lips. "With 4 adults in the house, the utilities are going to skyrocket. Kendra, I need you to cover the grocery bill entirely from now on, and I am raising your rent contribution by $1,500. Kyle and Ebony need time to save up." I looked at Kyle, who was smirking as he reached for another slice. I looked at Ebony, glowing from my expensive skincare. And I looked at my mother, who saw me not as a daughter, but as a utility, a resource to be mined. The audacity was breathtaking. They were parasites burrowing deeper into my life, convinced I would never cut them off. I placed my fork down on the table with a deliberate click. "No," I said calmly. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? I stood up. I am not paying extra. I am not buying your groceries. And I am certainly not funding their lifestyle. In fact, I suggest you enjoy this pizza, because it is the last meal I am ever paying for in this house. The spreadsheet on my laptop screen was a crime scene, and the blood was red ink. I had spent the last 3 hours deep diving into the family finances, peeling back layers of negligence that I had been too busy to notice before. My mother, Patricia, had always been secretive about her primary credit card, the Platinum American Express, that carried a $50,000 limit. She claimed she only used it for emergencies. But when I hacked into the online statement using the recovery password I had set up years ago, I didn't see emergency medical bills or home repairs. I saw a catastrophe. The balance was sitting at $48,000, nearly maxed out. But it wasn't the total that made my blood run cold. It was the name listed under authorized users. There in bold letters was Kyle's name. He had been added to the account 6 months ago. I scrolled through the transaction history, my forensic eye scanning for patterns. It wasn't grocery runs or gas, it was transaction after transaction to crypto exchanges. Coinbase, Binance, obscure wallets I didn't even recognize. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. In less than half a year, my unemployed brother-in-law had siphoned $45,000 of my mother's credit to gamble on digital coins that had since crashed to zero. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just irresponsibility, it was theft. Or so I thought. I grabbed my laptop and marched downstairs. The house was quiet, the smell of the pizza I refused to pay for still lingering in the air. I found Patricia in the living room watching TV as if her life wasn't collapsing. I slammed the laptop down on the coffee table, startling her. "Explain this," I demanded, pointing at the glowing screen. "Explain why Kyle is an authorized user on your Platinum card. Explain why there is $45,000 of debt to crypto companies." Patricia didn't look shocked. She didn't gasp. She simply adjusted her glasses and looked away, a flush rising on her cheeks. "I know about it, Kendra," she said, her voice defensive. "Kyle explained it to me. It is not gambling, it is investing. He has a system. He told me that the market is down right now, but when it bounces back, we are going to triple our money. He is doing this for the family to help us retire in luxury. You just don't understand modern finance." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the level of delusion. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "The market isn't coming back for these coins. They are scams. He didn't invest your money, he incinerated it. You are paying 20% interest on money that is gone forever. You are $50,000 in debt because you let a man who can't even hold a job speculate with your credit score." Patricia stood up, crossing her arms. "Stop being so negative. You always want to see the worst in him. Kyle promised me he would pay it back as soon as his other investments mature. He is trying, which is more than I can say for you right now. You are just jealous that he has a vision." I picked up my laptop, realizing that logic had no place in this house anymore. She wasn't a victim of theft. She was a willing accomplice to her own destruction, and she was about to drag me down with her if I didn't cut the rope. My mother's defense of Kyle was cut short by the man himself walking into the living room, still chewing on the last slice of the pizza I had refused to buy. Ebony followed him, wrapped in my bathrobe, her skin glowing with my stolen moisturizer. They looked like the kings and queens of the castle while I stood there clutching the laptop that held the proof of their financial ruin. When I repeated the figure, $45,000 lost in a crypto scam, Kyle didn't even flinch. He just laughed, a condescending sound that made my blood boil. "You really don't get it, do you, Kendra?" Kyle said, leaning back on my sofa and putting his feet on my coffee table. "It's not lost. The market is just in a correction phase. It's called holding with diamond hands. When the coin rebounds next month, that 45 grand will be worth $500,000. You're looking at a snapshot in time and panicking because you have a scarcity mindset." I looked at him, stunned by his confidence. "Kyle," I said, keeping my voice level, "the exchange you used was shut down by the SEC last week for fraud. The money isn't waiting for a rebound. It has been seized by federal authorities. It is gone. Zero." Ebony stepped in, then placing a protective hand on her husband's shoulder. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me with pity. God, you are so bitter, she said. You are jealous because Kyle is a visionary. He has the courage to take risks. What are you? You are just a worker bee, Kendra. You clock in, you clock out, you collect your little paycheck. You have no ambition. You are just a corporate drone who can't stand seeing someone else try to build an empire. The room fell silent. My sister, who was currently unemployed, facing a felony charge and living off my charity, was calling me a worker bee. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I looked at my mother, expecting her to correct this delusion, expecting her to be the parent. Instead, Patricia sighed and looked at her watch. Enough fighting, Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. Whether it is an investment or a loss, it doesn't matter right now. What matters is the statement date. Kendra, the minimum payment on the Amex is due in 48 hours. It is $5,000. If we miss it, my credit score will plummet and the interest rate will jump to 29%. I stared at her, and I asked, and Patricia continued, her voice taking on that familiar demanding tone. I know you just got your quarterly bonus. I need you to transfer the $5,000 to me tonight. We need to keep the account in good standing so Kyle can manage the rest of the portfolio. Think of it as protecting the family name. We cannot have a default on our record. My jaw tightened. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding a bailout so they could keep playing their fantasy games. They wanted my worker bee money to fund their visionary lifestyle. I closed my laptop with a snap. You want my bonus? I asked softly. Patricia nodded, expecting compliance. I looked at the three of them, the narcissist, the golden child, and the parasite. And I knew exactly what I had to do. The time for auditing was over. It was time for liquidation. I did not transfer the $5,000 to my mother's American Express account. Instead, I unlocked my phone and wired $12,000 to the leasing office of the Sovereign, one of the most exclusive high-rise buildings in downtown Atlanta. I had toured a unit there months ago as a daydream, a place to escape to in my mind. Tonight, I made it my reality. I signed the electronic lease agreement right in front of them, my face completely impassive. Then I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and packed a single overnight bag. The next morning, the chaos began at 8 a.m. sharp. I had hired a premium moving service, the kind that packs everything for you. When the team of 4 uniformed men marched into the foyer, Patricia dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the marble floor, a fitting metaphor for what was about to happen to her life. What is going on? She shrieked, stepping over the ceramic shards. Who are these people? I walked down the stairs, fully dressed for work. These are the movers, I said calmly. I am moving out, Mom. Today. Patricia looked at the movers, who were already efficiently wrapping my furniture in protective plastic. You can't move out, she yelled, following me into the kitchen. We are in a crisis. Your sister needs support. You are abandoning us just because I asked for a little help with the credit card. I turned to face her. You didn't ask for help. You demanded my bonus to cover Kyle's gambling losses. And since you all seem to think I am nothing more than a worker bee, I have decided to take my honey elsewhere. The movers will be done by noon. It was then that the reality truly hit her. It wasn't emotional heartbreak, it was financial terror. Her eyes darted around the room as she did the mental math. Wait, she stammered, grabbing my arm. If you leave, who is going to pay the electric bill? It's due next week. And the water, the HOA fees, you always pay those. I gently removed her hand from my arm. That is correct. I have paid the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, and the groceries for this house for the last 5 years. I have subsidized your lifestyle so you could play the wealthy matriarch. But since Kyle is such a financial genius with his crypto investments, I am sure he can cover the $3,000 in monthly utilities. Kyle, who had wandered out of the guest room, scratching his stomach, looked pale. 3,000, he squeaked. I smiled, picking up my car keys. Welcome to the real world, Kyle. The electricity isn't free, and neither is my patience. I walked out the front door, the sound of packing tape echoing behind me like a symphony of freedom. I sat in my Range Rover and looked at the house one last time. It looked exactly the same as it always had, stately, impressive, perfect. But without me inside to pay the bills, I knew it was only a matter of time before the lights went out. Literally. I sat on the plush velvet sofa of my new apartment on the 25th floor, looking out at the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city looked different from up here, peaceful, organized, and distant. I had a glass of Pinot Noir in one hand and my laptop in the other. It was time to sever the umbilical cord that had been strangling my finances for years. I didn't do it with anger. I did it with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. I logged into the Georgia Power customer portal first. The account was in my name, linked to my social security number. I clicked the tab for service management and selected Stop Service. When asked for a reason, I typed in 2 words: moved out. I set the disconnection time for immediately. Next came the water department, then the gas company. Finally, I navigated to the Xfinity website. This was the one that would hurt the most. I was paying $300 a month for the gigabit speed internet plan specifically because Kyle claimed he needed low latency for his trading and Ebony needed high bandwidth for her 4K live streams. I stared at the button that said Cancel Subscription. I thought about the $45,000 Kyle had incinerated. I thought about Ebony's smirk in the hospital. I clicked the mouse. The confirmation screen popped up. Your service has been terminated. I closed the laptop and took a sip of wine. The show was about to begin. 5 miles away inside the dark brick walls of the family estate, the consequences hit at exactly 8:15 p.m. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I knew their routine perfectly. Kyle was undoubtedly hunched over his multi-monitor setup in the guest room, sweating as he watched a volatile crypto coin fluctuate. He was likely seconds away from executing a trade that he hoped would salvage his disastrous portfolio. Downstairs, Ebony was in the middle of a TikTok live, her ring light blazing, weeping fake tears as she told her followers about her cruel sister who abandoned her. Suddenly, the music stopped. The high-speed Wi-Fi router in the hallway winked out. In the guest room, Kyle's screens froze. I imagined the scream that tore from his throat. No, not now. He frantically clicked his mouse, but the connection to the exchange was dead. He grabbed his phone to use cellular data, but the thick stone walls of the old house blocked the signal. He was trapped in a digital dead zone, watching his imaginary fortune bleed out in real time, unable to stop the bleeding. Downstairs, Ebony's stream cut to black mid-sentence. Her ring light flickered and died, then the overhead chandelier plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The air conditioning unit outside groaned and fell silent. The entire house was swallowed by a suffocating blackness. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, shrieking my name, stumbling in the dark, reaching for light switches that would never work again. They were alone. They were disconnected. And for the first time in their lives, they were going to have to sit in the dark and think about what they had done. 2 weeks of silence was a luxury I had never truly known until I moved into the Sovereign. For 14 days, my phone did not ring with frantic demands for money. My evenings were not interrupted by screaming matches or fake crises. I began to sleep through the night. But I knew my family too well to believe they had simply accepted defeat. They were like mold. Just because you couldn't see them didn't mean they weren't growing in the dark, waiting to ruin the foundation. I just didn't expect the United States Postal Service to deliver the evidence of their self-destruction right to my concierge desk. I had set up a mail forwarding service the day I moved out, ensuring that any official documents in my name would come to my new address. It was a standard precaution. However, because my name was still technically associated with the family estate as a resident, the post office automated system swept up everything marked urgent or final notice and routed it to me. On a Tuesday evening, I picked up a thick envelope from a major mortgage lender. The red block letters stamped across the front read, "Notice of default and intent to foreclose." I sat down in my living room and sliced the envelope open. My forensic accountant brain instantly shifted into gear. I wasn't looking at a family tragedy. I was looking at a balance sheet of negligence. The document stated that the mortgage on the Buckhead estate had not been paid in 6 months. While I had been paying for the lights, the water, and the food, assuming my mother was handling the house note with her pension, she had been letting the debt pile up. The bank was demanding immediate payment of $32,000 in arrears, or the house would be put up for auction in 30 days. This explained everything. It explained the desperation for my bonus. It explained the pressure to keep up appearances. They weren't just cash poor, they were on the verge of homelessness. But as I flipped to the second page of the foreclosure packet looking at the loan origination details, my blood ran cold. The document referenced a cash-out refinance that had taken place 2 years ago. According to the paperwork, the homeowners had taken out $200,000 of equity from the home. I stared at the signature line on the copy of the promissory note. There were 2 signatures. One was my mother's, looping and dramatic. The other was my father's, Otis Vance. It was a perfect replica of his handwriting, shaky, but distinct. The date next to the signature was June 15th, 2022. I put the paper down and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights, trying to process the enormity of what I was seeing. My father, Otis Vance, died of a heart attack in May of 2021. We buried him a full year before this document was signed. Dead men do not sign mortgage refinances. Dead men do not withdraw equity. My mother and Kyle hadn't just been irresponsible with money, they had committed federal bank fraud. They had forged a dead man's signature to steal equity from a house that was never supposed to be mortgaged in the first place. I wasn't just holding an eviction notice anymore. I was holding a prison sentence. I treated the foreclosure notice not as a family secret, but as evidence in a federal crime scene. I sat at my glass desk, the city lights reflecting off my monitors, and activated the specialized software I used for high-level fraud detection. I needed absolute proof before I pulled the trigger. I retrieved my father's old journals from a fireproof box I had kept since his funeral. His handwriting was distinctive, a jagged, heavy cursive born from years of manual labor before he moved into management. It had a rhythm, a specific slant to the right, that was impossible to replicate if you were not him. I scanned 10 samples of his authentic signature into the system. Then I uploaded the high-resolution PDF of the refinance document the bank had sent over. I overlaid them. The software beeped, highlighting the discrepancies in red. To the naked eye, the signature on the loan document looked convincing, but under digital magnification it was a clumsy forgery. The pressure points were all wrong. The ink flow was too consistent, lacking the natural hesitation of a human hand. It looked like someone had traced it using a lightbox. I zoomed in on the capital V in Vance. My father always looped the top of his V. The forger had made a sharp point. I knew that sharp point. I had seen it on birthday cards and failed business proposals for years. It was Kyle's handwriting. He had tried to mimic the style, but his muscle memory had betrayed him. I then looked at the date stamp. The notary stamp was from a woman named Sarah Miller. I ran a quick background check on her. Sarah Miller was a former classmate of Ebony's who had lost her notary license 6 months ago for misconduct. The circle was complete. They had constructed a conspiracy. Kyle had forged the signature, Patricia had likely provided the old documents to trace, and they had used a corrupt friend to notarize a dead man's consent. This was not just a civil dispute about unpaid bills. This was Title 18 United States Code Section 1344. Bank fraud, aggravated identity theft. The penalties were severe. We were talking about up to $1 million in fines and 30 years in federal prison. I leaned back in my chair, the cold light of the monitor illuminating my face. My mother and sister had called me a worker bee. They had mocked my job. They had no idea that the very skills they despised were currently dissecting their freedom. They had risked decades behind bars to extract $200,000 of equity money they had already wasted on luxury cars and crypto scams. I saved the file, encrypting it with a password. I labeled it Exhibit A. I was no longer just their daughter or sister. I was the lead witness for the prosecution, and I had everything I needed to bury them. The discovery of the forged signature was the smoking gun, but I needed the bullet. I sat in the dark of my apartment, the glow of the forensic software illuminating my face, and let my mind drift back to the sterile smell of the hospice room 3 years ago. It was the last lucid conversation I had with my father. He had gripped my hand with surprising strength, his breathing labored. "Kenny," he had whispered, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "Your mother means well, but she has no head for the future. She consumes. When I am gone, she will try to consume everything. If that day comes, go to First National. Box 402. The key is taped behind the old photo of us in my study. I had found that key the day after his funeral and kept it on my person ever since, a silent talisman I hoped I would never have to use. I hope my father was wrong about Patricia. But looking at the evidence of bank fraud on my screen, I realized he knew exactly who he was married to. The next morning, I took a personal hour and drove to First National Bank. It was a small, quiet institution on the other side of town, far away from the flashy commercial banks my mother preferred. The vault room was cold and smelled of dust and old paper. The bank manager accompanied me, sliding his master key into the lock while I inserted the small brass key my father had left me. The lock turned with a satisfying click. I pulled the long metal box out and carried it to a private viewing booth. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. I lifted the lid. There was no jewelry inside, no stacks of cash, no sentimental trinkets. There was only a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. I broke the seal and slid the contents onto the table. The first document was the last will and testament of Otis Vance. It was dated 5 years prior to his death. I scanned the pages quickly, my eyes widening with every paragraph. It explicitly stated that upon his death, the ownership of the Buckhead estate was not to pass to Patricia Vance. Instead, it was to be placed immediately into the Vance Family Trust. I picked up the second document, the trust deed. I read the terms of the trust and a chill went down my spine. My father had named me Kendra Vance as the sole trustee. The beneficiary was Patricia Vance, but her rights were limited to right of occupancy only. She was allowed to live in the house for the remainder of her life, provided she paid the utilities and taxes. But she did not own the title. She had no legal right to sell it, and she certainly had no legal right to mortgage it. The implications were catastrophic for my mother and Kyle. When they forged my father's signature to get that $200,000 cash-out refinance, they weren't just lying to the bank about him being alive. They were mortgaging a property they did not even own. They had committed title fraud on top of bank fraud. My father had seen this coming. He had known that if he left the house to her, she would lose it. So he gave the house to the one person he knew would protect it. Me. I placed the documents back into the envelope. My father had protected me from the grave, and he had just handed me the weapon I needed to end this war. I sat in the silence of the bank vault and read the words that changed everything. My father had not left his estate to his wife. The Clause 4 Section B was explicit. It stated that the property located at 450 Piedmont Avenue was to be transferred immediately upon his death to the Vance Family Trust, with Kendra Vance serving as the sole trustee and beneficiary. My hands shook as I read the next paragraph. It was a life estate provision. My father had loved my mother despite her flaws. He had written a clause allowing Patricia Vance to reside in the home for the remainder of her natural life rent-free. But there was a condition. A massive, bold print condition that my mother had clearly ignored. The document read that this right of occupancy is contingent upon the property remaining unencumbered. If the life tenant attempts to sell mortgage or use the property as collateral for any debt, the life estate terminates immediately and full possession reverts to the trustee. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. My father had predicted this. He knew that if he gave Patricia the title, she would leverage it to fund her vanity or bail out Ebony. So he gave her a roof over her head, but he kept the keys in my pocket. The realization of what she had done was sickening. To get around this, Patricia Bad not just ignored the will, she had buried it. She had gone to the probate court 3 years ago with an old will, one drafted when I was 10 years old, which named her as the sole executor and beneficiary. She had lied to the court, lied to the lawyers, and lied to me. She had probated a revoked document to steal a $3 million asset. And then she broke the one rule my father set. By signing that fraudulent refinance deal with Kyle to extract $200,000, she had not just committed a crime. She had triggered the termination clause. Legally, she was no longer a resident. She was a trespasser. I carefully placed the original documents back into the metal box, but not before taking high-resolution photos of every page. I then asked the bank manager to notarize certified copies. I walked out of that bank, not as a victim of identity theft, but as the legal owner of the house my family was currently destroying. They were living on borrowed time, quite literally. Patricia thought she was the queen of the castle because she had successfully gaslit me for years. She did not know that the castle had a new queen, and I had the paperwork to prove it. The foreclosure notice was no longer my problem to solve. It was the weapon I was going to use to evict them. I checked the calendar. Thanksgiving was in 3 days. It was time to prepare the main course. The security at the Sovereign was supposed to be impenetrable, a fortress of glass and steel, designed to keep the chaos of the world at bay. But parasites have a way of finding cracks in the foundation. 2 days after I discovered the fraudulent mortgage, a knock echoed through my apartment at 10 in the evening. I checked the video intercom expecting a delivery. Instead, I saw the distorted, smug face of my brother-in-law, Kyle. He had likely tailgated a resident through the lobby doors, bypassing the concierge entirely. I debated calling security to have him removed, but curiosity and the forensic need to gather evidence won out. I opened the door just enough to see him standing there wearing a cheap suit that was too tight in the shoulders. He smiled, a greasy expression meant to convey warmth. "Can I come in, Kenny?" he asked. "We need to clear the air." I did not step back. "Say what you have to say from the hallway, Kyle." He sighed, shaking his head as if I were a petulant child. "Look, I know things got heated. Patricia is a mess. Ebony is crying herself to sleep. We are family, Kendra. Families fight, but they don't destroy each other. I am here as a peacemaker. We want you to come home. We want to put this ugly business behind us." I crossed my arms. "There is no home to come back to, Kyle. You and Mom spent the equity. The bank is taking it." His smile faltered for a second, then vanished completely. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "That is actually what I wanted to discuss. See, we know you have savings. We know you have liquid assets. You are going to pay off the arrears on the house. You are going to reinstate the mortgage. And you are going to apologize to your mother. And if I don't," I asked, my hand slipping into my pocket, tapping the record button on my phone. Kyle chuckled darkly. "You work for Sterling and Associates, big firm, very sensitive about their reputation. I have been doing some reading online. It would be a shame if an anonymous whistleblower reported that a certain senior accountant was embezzling client funds. Even if it is not true, the investigation alone would get you suspended, maybe fired. In your industry, a rumor is as good as a conviction." I felt a surge of adrenaline, not fear, but the thrill of a hunter watching prey walk into a trap. "Are you telling me that you will fabricate a crime to destroy my career unless I give you money?" I asked, clearly ensuring his voice would be picked up by the microphone. Kyle leaned in, his breath smelling of mints and malice. "I am saying that keeping your reputation clean has a price. The price is $32,000 for the bank, and let's say $10,000 for my silence. Consider it a consulting fee. You pay up, and I forget I ever thought you were a thief." I stared at him for a long moment, memorizing the arrogance in his eyes. "Get out of my building, Kyle," I said softly. "If you ever come near me again, security won't be the only ones I call." He straightened his jacket, winking at me. "Think about it, Kenny. You have 24 hours. He turned and walked down the hallway, whistling as he waited for the elevator. I closed the door and locked it. I pulled my phone out and stopped the recording. I played it back, listening to his threat, crystal clear in high definition. He thought he had just checkmated me. He had no idea he had just handed me a confession to felony extortion. I saved the file and uploaded it to the cloud folder titled Exhibit B. The case against my family was now bulletproof. The final humiliation arrived at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday, displayed for all of Buckhead to see. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but the security alerts on my phone from the old house's perimeter cameras gave me a front row seat. A Fulton County Sheriff's deputy walked up the long, winding driveway. He didn't knock. He didn't ask for permission. He simply took a staple gun and attached a neon orange notice to the center of the hand-carved oak front door. It was a notice of eviction and sheriff's sale. The placement was deliberate and devastating. Mrs. Jenkins, the head of the church gossip committee, was walking her poodle right past the gate at that exact moment. I watched on the camera feed as she stopped, squinted at the orange paper, and immediately pulled out her phone. By noon, the entire congregation would know that Patricia Vance, the woman who sat in the front pew and judged everyone else's sins, was getting kicked out of her mansion. My phone began to ring 5 minutes later. It was Patricia. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. On the 5th attempt, I answered, putting the call on speaker as I organized the certified trust documents on my desk. Kendra. Her voice was a ragged scream, thick with tears that for once might have been real. They put a sticker on the door. A sheriff came to my house. Do you understand the shame? Mrs. Jenkins saw it. I can't show my face at Bible study. I took a sip of water. I imagine that is very difficult for you, Mom. Difficult. You have to fix this. She switched instantly from anger to the frail, elderly victim act she had perfected over decades. Kendra, baby, listen to me. My heart can't take this. I have been having palpitations all morning. Do you want to kill your mother? Do you want me to have a heart attack right here on this floor? I am an old woman. I can't lose my home. Your father built this life for us. How can you let strangers take his legacy away? The manipulation was breathtaking. She was invoking the name of the man whose signature she had forged. She was claiming to protect a legacy she had mortgaged to fund a crypto scam. I felt a cold, hard knot in my stomach. She still didn't get it. She didn't see herself as a criminal. She saw herself as a martyr. I know, Mom. I said, my voice smooth and unthreatening. It is a terrible situation. So you'll pay it? She asked, hope creeping into her voice. You'll wire the $32,000, Kyle said. If we pay the arrears by Friday, they will take the sticker down. We can say it was a clerical error. Please, Kendra, just pay it and you can come home. We will forgive you for moving out. We can be a family again. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to give her false hope. I am not wiring any money today, Mom. But I cut her off. But I am coming to Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. I have been doing a lot of research. I have found a permanent solution to the housing problem. I will bring all the paperwork with me. We will sit down as a family, and I will resolve everything once and for all. Patricia let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank God. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. I knew you were a good girl deep down. I will tell Kyle to set an extra place at the table. Hurry, Kendra. Come save us. I hung up the phone. She thought I was coming to write a check. She thought I was coming to reinstate the mortgage and crawl back into my role as the obedient financier. She had no idea that I wasn't coming to save her house. I was coming to claim mine, and the paperwork I was bringing wasn't a check. It was an eviction timeline. See you at Thanksgiving, I whispered to the empty room. Make sure the turkey is carved, because I am coming for the meat. Thanksgiving morning usually brings the scent of cinnamon and roasting poultry, but in my apartment on the 25th floor, the air smelled of ozone and printer ink. I was not preparing a casserole or a pumpkin pie. I was preparing a slaughter. My dining room table, usually a place for meals, had been transformed into a war room. Spread across the glass surface were the components of my family's destruction, organized with the ruthless efficiency of a forensic audit. I had spent the last 3 hours digitizing every receipt, every legal document, and every incriminating photo. I knew my audience well. My mother, Patricia, was a master of gaslighting. If I simply told the truth, she would cry, deny, and spin a narrative that made me the villain. She would rely on the emotional support of the extended family to drown out my facts. So I had decided that I would not just speak the truth. I would broadcast it. I opened the box of my latest purchase, a high-definition portable projector with a built-in sound system. It was small, sleek, and powerful enough to turn a dining room wall into a cinema screen. I connected it to my laptop and began to assemble the presentation. I treated it like a pitch deck for a hostile corporate takeover. Slide 1 was the warm-up. The hospital security footage I had archived showing the clear difference between the key fobs. It was irrefutable proof that the initial crash was caused by theft, not a misunderstanding. Slide 2 was the financial autopsy. I uploaded the PDF statements from the American Express account. I used red highlighters to circle the dates and times of the crypto transfers, matching them perfectly to the crashes in the market. I wanted every aunt, uncle, and cousin to see exactly where the family fortune had gone. It wasn't stolen by the economy. It was gambled away by the man sitting at the head of the table. Slide 3 was the smoking gun. The high-resolution scan of the mortgage refinance document placed side by side with the forensic analysis of my father's signature. I zoomed in on the notary stamp of the disgraced Sarah Miller. This was the slide that would shift the conversation from a family dispute to a federal crime. And finally, the encore. I plugged in the audio file from 2 nights ago. I tested the levels, turning the volume up until Kyle's voice filled my living room. The threat was crystal clear. The demand for $10,000 in exchange for silence. It was the sound of a desperate man digging his own grave. I listened to it twice, ensuring the clarity was perfect. I packed the projector, the laptop, and the hard copies of the evidence into my leather briefcase. I went to my closet and chose my armor. I didn't wear a soft, festive sweater. I put on a sharp, tailored black suit and stilettos that clicked against the floor like the ticking of a clock. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like a daughter coming home for the holidays. I looked like an executioner. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The turkey was already in the oven at the big house, but I was bringing the fire. The driveway of the Buckhead estate looked like a luxury car dealership packed with the Mercedes and Lexuses of my extended family. As I walked up the stone path, I noticed the front door had been freshly scrubbed. The neon orange sheriff's sticker was gone, likely scraped off with a razor blade and shame. To the outside world, this was just another lavish Vance family Thanksgiving. But I knew better. I was not walking into a dinner party. I was walking into an ambush. The moment I stepped across the threshold, the smell of roasted turkey and expensive perfume hit me, mixed with the heavy, suffocating scent of hypocrisy. Patricia had really pulled out all the stops. She hadn't just invited the usual aunts and uncles. She had invited the heavy artillery. Sitting in the center of the living room holding a crystal tumbler of iced tea was Pastor Williams. Beside him sat Auntie May and Uncle Jerome, the elders of the family who controlled the gossip mill for the entire congregation. Patricia knew that I respected the pastor. She was banking on his presence to shame me into submission. The atmosphere was thick with a performative wholesomeness that made my skin crawl. In the kitchen, I saw a sight that was almost comical. Kyle was wearing an apron. The man who couldn't boil water without supervision was busily arranging deviled eggs on a silver platter, acting the part of the devoted son-in-law. Ebony was right beside him, fluffing pillows and refilling drinks for the elders, playing the role of the dutiful, fragile daughter recovering from her traumatic accident. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. When Patricia saw me, she didn't yell. She didn't scowl. Instead, she stood up with a beatific smile, opening her arms wide, as if she hadn't threatened to sue me a week ago. "Look, everyone," she announced, her voice trembling with staged emotion. "The prodigal daughter has returned. Kendra made it." The room went silent. Pastor Williams nodded solemnly. It is good to see you, child. Your mother has been so worried about your spiritual path. I let her hug me. Her body was stiff, and she whispered in my ear low enough that only I could hear. I told them you were bringing the check to save the house. Don't embarrass me in front of the pastor, or you will rot in hell. She pulled back, beaming at the room. Kendra has been working so hard, haven't you, baby? She knows how much this home means to her father's legacy. She is here to make things right. Kyle walked over, offering me a glass of punch with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey, Kenny. Glad you came to your senses. We were just telling Pastor Williams how supportive you've been. I took the glass but didn't drink. I looked around the room at the faces of my relatives. They looked at me with a mixture of judgment and expectation. They had been fed a narrative where I was the villainous, greedy sister holding the family ransom. They were the jury, and Patricia had already rigged the trial. I tightened my grip on my briefcase. They wanted a show, they wanted a savior. What they were about to get was a revelation that would shatter their stained glass reality forever. I bypassed the buffet table, ignoring the trays of mac and cheese and candied yams that my money had likely paid for in previous years. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor with a rhythmic precision that cut through the low hum of conversation. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on me. To them, I was the villain of the week, the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her struggling mother. To me, they were merely witnesses to a crime scene that was about to be secured. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked straight to the end of the long dining table opposite where Pastor Williams sat and placed my black leather briefcase on the white tablecloth. The heavy thud of the case silencing the room completely. Auntie May, a woman who wore her piety like a weapon and her judgment like a crown, lowered her fork. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering disdainfully on my tailored suit. It was clear she found my attire too severe, too modern, and entirely inappropriate for a family gathering. She wiped her mouth with a napkin, leaving a smear of lipstick, and decided to fire the opening shot. Well, look who finally decided to show up, May said, her voice dripping with sugary malice. We were about to say grace without you. I see you came empty-handed. She gestured dramatically to the spread of food. Patricia told us you moved into some fancy high-rise downtown. She said you were doing so well for yourself. I suppose all that money goes to rent and clothes because you certainly didn't spend a dime on this dinner. Not even a turkey, Kendra. Or is buying food for your family beneath you now? A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. Uncle Jerome chuckled, shaking his head. That's the problem with these young folks, May. They get a little degree and forget where they came from. Patricia jumped in, trying to diffuse the tension before I could respond. Now, May, Kendra has been very busy, and I am sure she brought something much more important than a turkey. She looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes, her gaze darting to the briefcase. She was convinced that inside that leather case was a cashier's check for $32,000. She thought I was about to buy her salvation. I looked at Auntie May, meeting her gaze with a cold, flat stare. You are right, Auntie. I didn't buy a turkey. I didn't buy a single side dish. Because unlike everyone else at this table, I don't believe in feeding people who are trying to eat me alive. I rested my hand on the latch of the briefcase. I brought something much heavier than a bird. I brought the truth. And frankly, after you see what is in here, I doubt anyone is going to have an appetite left. I unclicked the latches. Snap. Snap. The sound echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes narrowing. He sensed the shift in the air. He knew that checkbooks didn't need to be hooked up to a projector, but it was too late for him to run. The court was in session. Pastor Williams set his glass of iced tea down on a coaster, signaling that the official proceedings were about to begin. He clasped his hands together and leaned forward, fixing me with a look of practiced benevolence. Kendra, he began, his voice rolling like thunder in a canyon. We are gathered here today, not just to eat, but to heal. Your mother has shared with me the heavy burden on her heart. She feels that the devil has sown seeds of division in this family. She tells me there is strife over money, over possessions. He paused to let the words sink in, looking around the table to ensure he had the audience's full attention. Patricia wiped a non-existent tear from her eye. The pastor continued. Scripture tells us in Exodus 20 verse 12 to honor thy father and thy mother. It does not say honor them only when they are perfect. It does not say honor them only when it is convenient. It is an unconditional command. And in the New Testament we are taught that to whom much is given, much will be required. God has blessed you with a sharp mind and a high-paying career, Kendra. But those blessings are not yours to hoard. They are tools given to you by the Lord to lift up your kin. To turn your back on your mother in her hour of need is to turn your back on God's design for the family. The room was silent. Auntie May nodded vigorously, murmuring an amen under her breath. Kyle smirked, believing that the weight of religious guilt would finally crush my resistance. They expected me to bow my head, to shamefully reach into my bag, and produce the check that would wash away their sins and reinstate my status as the dutiful daughter. I did not bow my head. Instead, I stood up. The movement was sharp enough to make the pastor pause mid-breath. I looked him dead in the eye. "Thank you for the sermon, Pastor Williams," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the room like a cold wind. I always appreciate a lesson on morality. But if we are going to quote the 10 Commandments at the dinner table, I think we should be thorough. I walked over to the sideboard where I had set up my equipment. You mentioned the command to honor parents, but you seem to have skipped over 2 other very important commandments. The 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. And the 9th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, or in this case against thy sister. Patricia's face dropped. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Sit down, Kendra." I ignored her. I plugged the HDMI cable into my laptop. A bright beam of light shot out from the projector, hitting the blank cream-colored wall behind the pastor. I turned to the table. "You brought the church here to judge me. You wanted to talk about sins. So let us talk about them. But we aren't going to talk about my lack of generosity. We are going to talk about felony theft, fraud, and extortion. And unlike your sermons, Pastor, my evidence isn't based on faith. It is based on facts." I hit the spacebar on my laptop. The show had begun. The beam of light cut through the dim dining room, projecting a grainy black and white image onto the cream wallpaper behind Pastor Williams. It was security footage from the foyer of the Buckhead estate, timestamped at 1:45 in the morning on the night of the accident. The resolution was crisp enough to see the pores on my sister's face. The room fell into a deathly silence as everyone watched Ebony stumble into the frame. She was not frantic. She was not confused. She was laughing, holding her phone up to her face, as if she were recording a selfie video. On the screen, Ebony swayed slightly, her words slurring but unmistakably loud in the quiet dining room. She reached for the bowl on the entry table. Her hand hovered over my keys, then moved deliberately to the shiny new fob of the Cadillac. "I am taking the big one tonight," she said to her phone screen, preening for her followers. "I need to stunt on them at the club. I am not driving Kendra's boring old SUV. Taking the new whip. Mom will never know." She giggled a sharp, cruel sound and spun the keys around her finger before stumbling out the front door. I hit the pause button, freezing the image on Ebony's smirk. The silence in the room was shattered by a collective gasp. Auntie May put a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting from the screen to Ebony, who was now shrinking into her chair, her face a mask of horror. The narrative of the innocent mistake, the story about grabbing the wrong keys in a panic while fleeing a domestic crisis, had just evaporated. I turned to the table, my voice calm but projecting to the back of the room. "You all heard the story Patricia told you. You heard that Ebony was stressed, that she made a simple error in judgment, that she thought she was taking my car. But that video shows premeditation. It shows intent. She did not take my keys by accident. She looked at them, called my car boring, and deliberately chose the vehicle she knew was uninsured and unregistered. She stole it for clout." Patricia stood up, knocking her chair over. "Turn it off, Kendra. You are embarrassing your sister. This is private family business." I looked at my mother, cold and unyielding. You made it public business when you invited half the congregation here to shame me into paying for her crime. You told the police it was a misunderstanding to save her from a grand theft auto charge. You lied to the insurance company. And you lied to everyone at this table. You asked them to pray for a victim, but you should have asked them to pray for a thief. Uncle Jerome, usually the quietest man in the room, spoke up. His voice was low and rumbling. Patricia? Is that true? Did she really take it just to show off? Patricia stammered, looking for a lie that would stick, but the frozen image of her daughter mocking my car loomed over her like a judge. For the first time, the wall of blind support began to crack. The church ladies were exchanging looks. The sympathy was draining out of the room, replaced by the cold, hard realization that they had been played. And I was just getting started. I clicked the next slide. I clicked the remote again. The image of Ebony's smirk vanished, replaced by a dense color-coded spreadsheet projected onto the wall. This was not a random collection of numbers. It was a forensic map of how a legacy dies. I pointed to the column on the left highlighted in red. This, I announced, my voice steady and cold, is Dad's retirement fund. The money he saved for 30 years working at the assembly plant. The money that was supposed to care for Mom in her old age. I traced the line across the screen to the column on the right. And this is where it went. June 12th, $5,000 to Coinbase. July 4th, $10,000 to a wallet named Crypto King. August 1st, $15,000 to an offshore exchange that does not even exist anymore. I looked directly at Kyle, who was now sweating profusely through his dress shirt. In 6 months, Kyle transferred $45,000 of Dad's hard-earned money into volatile coins that crashed to zero. He didn't invest in the family. He gambled away your grandfather's sweat and blood. A low murmur of anger rippled through the room. Auntie May clutched her pearls, staring at Kyle with pure disgust. Otis worked double shifts for that money, she whispered, her voice trembling. He broke his back for that pension. I didn't let the anger settle. I clicked to the next slide. A split screen appeared. On the left was a photo from Ebony's Instagram showing her posing with a limited edition Chanel handbag captioned, "Living my best life." On the right was a scanned invoice from the local pharmacy stamped, "Past due," in angry red ink. I turned to my mother. You told me you couldn't afford your blood pressure medication last month, Mom. You asked me to wire you $300 because the pharmacy wouldn't refill your prescription on credit. I pointed to the screen. But on the exact same day you claimed to be broke, your American Express card was used to purchase this $4,000 handbag for Ebony. You chose to risk a stroke so she could look rich on the internet. Patricia's face turned a sickly shade of gray. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She looked around the room, seeing the judgment in the eyes of the pastor and her siblings. She had to take control. She stood up, knocking her water glass over. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "It is my money. I can do what I want with it. If I want to spoil my children, that is my business. I gave it to them. They didn't steal it." I looked at her, seeing not a mother but an enabler who would burn down the world to protect her delusions. "You say you gave it to them," I replied calmly. "But generosity is easy when you are spending money that doesn't belong to you. You didn't just spend your pension, Mom. You spent the house." And that leads us to the final slide, the one that will explain why the sheriff put a sticker on your door. I clicked the remote one more time, and the screen shifted to a document that looked boring to the untrained eye, but was lethal to everyone sitting at the table. It was the mortgage refinance agreement blown up to massive proportions. I walked over to the wall and placed my hand next to the signature line. 2 years ago, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room, this house was refinanced. $200,000 of equity was pulled out in cash. The bank approved it because they saw 2 signatures, Patricia Vance and Otis Vance. I turned to look at my Uncle Jerome. "Uncle, when did we bury Dad?" Jerome swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the screen. "May of 2021, he whispered. I nodded. Exactly. I pointed back to the screen. But this document is dated June of 2022. Unless Dad rose from the grave to visit a notary public, this signature is a forgery, and it is a clumsy one. I ran a forensic analysis. The pressure points matched the handwriting of the man currently sweating through his apron. Kyle knocked his chair over as he stood up, his face a mask of panic. This is illegal. You can't show this. That is private financial information. Sit down, Kyle. I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. I am not done. I clicked the remote again. A new document appeared. The original last will and testament of Otis Vance. The room gasped. Patricia let out a low moan, burying her face in her hands. You all thought Mom owned this house, I continued. You were wrong. Dad knew that if he left the deed to her, she would mortgage it to fund her vanity. So he left the property to the Vance Family Trust. He named me as the sole trustee. He gave Mom a life estate, which meant she could live here rent-free until she died. But there was one condition. Clause 4B. If the tenant attempts to encumber the property with debt, the life estate is terminated immediately. I turned to face my mother, who was now trembling violently. By forging Dad's signature to steal that equity, you didn't just commit federal bank fraud, Mom. You triggered the termination clause. You voided your right to live here. This house does not belong to the bank, and it certainly doesn't belong to you. Legally, as of the moment you signed that fraud, this house reverted to me. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You aren't just facing eviction. You and Kyle committed aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. The FBI doesn't care about your tears. They don't care about your status in the church. They care about the $200,000 you stole. You aren't just losing your home today. You are looking at 10 to 30 years in a federal penitentiary. The sheriff's sticker on the door is the least of your problems. The real problem is that I have already sent this entire file to the district attorney. The silence that followed my pronouncement was not the quiet of peace. It was the vacuum before an explosion. Patricia looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to process the shift from family dinner to federal indictment. Kyle, however, processed it instantly. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated, replaced by the primal terror of a hunted animal. He scrambled back from the table, his chair clattering to the floor. He looked at the back door, his eyes darting to the window, measuring the distance to freedom. But it was too late. The front door didn't just open. It was breached with a heavy, authoritative force that shook the crystal chandelier. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway, bypassing the formalities of a Thanksgiving entrance. 3 men in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI Economic Crimes Division marched into the dining room. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of predators who had located their prey. The air in the room instantly shifted from roasted turkey to cold, hard steel. Kyle Vance, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming over the whimpering of Auntie May. You are under arrest for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Hands where we can see them, now. Kyle didn't comply. He backed up against the china cabinet, knocking over a vase. No, he screamed, his voice high and shrill. You have the wrong person. It wasn't me. It was her. He pointed a shaking finger at Patricia. She told me to sign it. She said it was okay. She is the owner. I just did what she said. Patricia let out a strangled gasp. Kyle, how dare you? The agents didn't care about the family drama. 2 of them closed the distance in seconds. One grabbed Kyle's wrist, twisting it behind his back with a practiced motion that forced a yelp of pain from his lips. The metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs clicking shut cut through the room louder than any prayer Pastor Williams could offer. Kyle struggled, kicking his legs, his face pressed against the glass of the display cabinet. My shoulder. You are breaking my shoulder. Ebony finally snapped out of her shock. She didn't run to her mother. She lunged at the officers. Get off him, she shrieked, clawing at the agent's arm. You can't touch him. Do you know who we are? We are Vances. This is a private home. Get out! The third agent stepped in, blocking her path with a raised hand. Ma'am, step back, or you will be charged with obstruction of justice. Sit down. Ebony froze, looking at the badge, then at her husband being hauled upright like a sack of garbage. She turned to me, her eyes burning with hatred. You did this! She screamed, spittle flying from her mouth. You called them. You ruined our lives. You are a monster. Kendra, a jealous, bitter monster? I stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold, with the detachment of a forensic auditor watching a ledger finally balance out. I didn't yell back. I didn't defend myself. I simply watched as the agents dragged a weeping, pleading Kyle toward the front door. His heels dragged on the hardwood floor, leaving scuff marks that Patricia would have usually freaked out about. But Patricia was currently slumped in her chair, clutching her chest, watching her golden boy sell her out to save his own skin. The chaos was absolute. The dinner was ruined. But justice was finally being served, and it tasted better than any cranberry sauce. The blue lights of the police cruisers were still flashing through the front windows, casting a strobing, chaotic rhythm over the ruined Thanksgiving dinner. Kyle was gone, his screams fading as the heavy oak door slammed shut. The room was left in a stunned, vibrating silence. Patricia sat frozen in her chair, staring at the empty spot where her golden child had been sitting just moments before. She looked small, frail, and utterly defeated. The lead FBI agent, a man with a face carved from granite, turned his attention to her. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. We are not taking you into custody at this moment. Your age and your lack of prior criminal history are being taken into consideration, pending further investigation into your level of coercion by your son-in-law. Patricia let out a sob of relief, reaching for her water glass with a shaking hand. Oh, thank God. Thank you, officer. I didn't know. I really didn't know he was doing those things. The agent held up a hand, stopping her. Do not thank me yet. While you are not under arrest, you can no longer remain on this property. The bank has successfully petitioned for an emergency eviction based on the fraudulent nature of the refinance and the default on payments. Furthermore, as this house is now considered a crime scene involving federal identity theft, it is being sealed. You have 30 minutes to gather your medication and essential clothing. You need to vacate the premises immediately. Patricia's face crumbled. Leave now. But it is Thanksgiving, I have nowhere to go. She looked frantically around the room, her eyes landing on the relatives who had been so eager to judge me just an hour ago. She stumbled toward Auntie May, reaching out with desperate hands. May, please! You have the guest room. I can stay with you just for a few days until this gets sorted out. We are family. Auntie May. The woman who had preached about loyalty and charity recoiled as if Patricia had a contagious disease. She pulled her expensive shawl tight around her shoulders and took a step back. I am sorry, Patricia May said, her voice icy and distant. But I cannot have the FBI knocking on my door. My husband is a deacon. We have a reputation in this community. If you are involved in bank fraud, we simply cannot be associated with that kind of trouble. It wouldn't look right. Patricia gasped as if slapped. She turned to Uncle Jerome. Jerome, you are my brother. Surely you won't let them put me on the street. Jerome wouldn't even meet her eyes. He was already putting on his coat, ushering his wife toward the door. You should have thought about that before you let that boy steal Otis's pension, Patricia. I can't risk my assets getting frozen if they think I am an accomplice. You are on your own. One by one, the guests scrambled for the exit. The people who had eaten her food, engaged in her gossip, and fueled her delusions for years fled like rats from a sinking ship. They didn't care about her. They cared about their proximity to scandal. Within 5 minutes, the driveway was empty. The Mercedes and Lexuses sped away, leaving Patricia standing in the center of the foyer, holding a plastic bag of toiletries, with Ebony weeping uselessly on the stairs. The house was cold, dark, and empty. The only person left standing there was me. And I wasn't there to offer a ride. I was there to lock the door. 30 days later, I stood on the cold concrete steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. The air was biting, blowing dead leaves across the pavement, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was the feeling of watching my childhood home being auctioned off like a piece of discarded furniture. The bank had wasted no time. With the mortgage in default and the investigation into the fraudulent refinance ongoing, they wanted the asset off their books. They didn't care about the history or the memories. They just wanted to recoup their losses. A small crowd of investors had gathered. They were flippers, mostly men in windbreakers holding clipboards looking for a bargain they could whitewash and resell for a profit. They didn't know about the foundation cracks. They didn't know about the faulty wiring in the guest room. And they certainly didn't know that the woman standing quietly in the back, wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat, was the only one who truly understood the value of the property. The auctioneer began his rapid-fire chant, a rhythmic song of liquidation. The opening bid was insultingly low, barely covering the outstanding debt. One of the flippers raised his hand, then another. The price ticked up slowly. I waited. I had done the math. I knew exactly where their profit margins ended. When the bidding stalled at $400,000 a steal for a Buckhead estate, but high for a property with a clouded title, the investors started to hesitate. They were nervous about the federal liens and the ongoing criminal case. They saw risk. I saw opportunity. I reached into my bag and touched the certified check I had prepared. The irony was delicious. The money didn't come from my salary. It came from the Vance Family Trust. When my mother committed fraud, she legally disqualified herself as a beneficiary, triggering a clause that released the liquid assets directly to me as the trustee. I was using my father's money to buy back my father's house from the bank that my mother had tried to cheat. 400 going once, the auctioneer shouted, looking around the crowd. I stepped forward and raised my paddle. 450,000, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. The investors turned to look at me. They saw the determination in my posture and the designer coat. They whispered among themselves, sensing that I wasn't just another flipper. I was a player with deep pockets and a personal stake. They folded. One by one, they shook their heads and put their paddles down, going twice. Sold to bidder number 42. The gavel slammed down with a definitive crack. It was over. I walked up to the clerk to sign the paperwork. As the pen moved across the paper, transferring the deed solely into my name, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The house was no longer a battleground. It wasn't a piggy bank for Kyle's gambling or a stage for Patricia's vanity. It was mine, owned free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no family baggage. I pocketed the receipt and walked back to my car. I had a set of locks to change, and I couldn't wait to hear the silence of an empty house. The fluorescent lights of the Waffle House on Piedmont Road did not flatter anyone, but for Ebony Vance they were a spotlight on her personal hell. It was 3 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of frying grease, burnt coffee, and regret. 3 months ago, Ebony would have been the customer stumbling in here after a night of VIP bottle service, laughing loudly and looking down on the staff. Now she was the one wearing the stained yellow polo shirt and the mandatory hairnet that flattened her once glamorous weave. She scraped the grill with a metal spatula, her arms aching. The diamond tennis bracelet she used to wear was gone, sold to a pawn shop to pay for a criminal defense lawyer who couldn't keep her husband out of prison. Kyle was currently sitting in a federal facility in Montgomery, and Ebony was here earning $2.13 an hour plus tips. Her Instagram account, once a shrine to her fake wealth, had been deactivated. The comments had become too vicious to bear after the news of the fraud broke. There were no more unboxing videos. There were only dirty dishes. The bell above the door chimed, signaling a new rush of post-club patrons. Ebony didn't look up immediately. She grabbed a pot of coffee and turned around, pasting on the customer service smile she had been forced to learn. "Welcome to Waffle House," she recited robotically. But the smile froze on her face when she saw who had just walked in. It was Sarah and Jessica, two girls from her former inner circle. They were dressed in sequined mini dresses, holding expensive clutches, smelling of expensive perfume and vodka. They were the same girls who had liked every one of her photos, the same girls who had ridden in the Cadillac she stole. They slid into a booth, giggling, unaware of the ghost standing behind the counter. Ebony tried to trade sections with the other waitress, a kindly older woman named Brenda, but the manager barked at her. "Table 4 needs service, Vance. Move it." Ebony swallowed the lump of bile in her throat. She grabbed her notepad and walked over, keeping her head down, hoping the grease on her face would act as a mask. "What can I get you, ladies?" she mumbled, staring at her shoes. Jessica stopped scrolling on her phone. "Wait a minute." She tilted her head, squinting in the harsh light. "Oh my God! Ebony! Is that you?" The table went silent. Sarah's jaw dropped, then curled into a cruel, knowing smirk. "It is her. Wow! I heard rumors that you guys lost the house, but I didn't know it was this bad. I thought Kyle was a millionaire genius. What happened? Did the crypto kingdom collapse?" Ebony gripped the pen so hard it almost snapped. "Can I take your order?" she whispered, refusing to meet their eyes. Sarah laughed, a high-pitched sound that cut deeper than any insult. "I'll have the all-star special. And make sure the eggs aren't runny. We know how you struggle with basic tasks. Remember when you said only losers work for a living?" Ebony wrote down the order, her face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the kitchen. She walked away as they pulled out their phones, undoubtedly snapping photos of her retreating back to post on the group chat she had been kicked out of. She went to the grill and cracked an egg, watching the yolk spill out. She was a worker bee now. The queen was dead, and the hive had no mercy. I sat in the mahogany-paneled library of the Buckhead estate, the very room where my father used to smoke his evening cigars. The house was quiet now. No shouting, no fake influencer laughter, just the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. I was reviewing the renovation plans for the kitchen when my personal cell phone began to buzz against the antique desk. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID did not show a name, only a long string of digits, and the location: Federal Correctional Institution, Montgomery. I debated ignoring it. I had already won. But a part of me, perhaps the forensic auditor who likes to see a case closed down to the final decimal point, wanted to hear the reality of the situation. I swiped right and pressed the phone to my ear. A robotic female voice announced that this was a prepaid call from an inmate. I accepted. "Kenny, is that you?" The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. It was high-cracked and trembling with a raw desperation that Kyle had never shown when he was spending my father's pension. "Kenny, please don't hang up. I have used my one phone call for the week to reach you. Patricia isn't answering. Ebony's number is disconnected. You are the only one left." I leaned back in my leather chair, taking a sip of sparkling water. "I am listening, Kyle," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "You have to get me out of here," he pleaded, his words tumbling over each other. "You don't understand. It is a nightmare in here. The food is inedible. The bed is a slab of concrete. There are guys in here who look at me like I am prey. I am not built for this, Kendra. I am a businessman. I made a mistake. Please. The bail hearing is tomorrow. The judge set it at $50,000. You have that kind of money. I know you bought the house back. You have the liquidity." I let out a short, dry laugh. It was fascinating. Even in prison wearing a jumpsuit, he was still counting my money. He still viewed me as a walking ATM designed to solve the problems he created. "Kyle," I said, cutting through his rambling. "You seem to be confused about how the legal system works. I did not put you there. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did. You forged a dead man's signature and defrauded a bank. I am the witness, not the plaintiff. And even if I could help you, why would I? You tried to blackmail me. You tried to ruin my career. You threatened to destroy me for $10,000. Now you want 50? I am sorry. He sobbed, the sound distorted by the prison line. I was desperate. I will pay you back, I swear. Once I get out, I have a new strategy. I just need access to a terminal. The market is turning, Kenny. I can double your money in a week if you just post the bail. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn that was finally mine. You are incorrigible, Kyle. You are standing on the edge of a cliff, and you are still trying to sell me a parachute that doesn't open. I am not posting your bail. I am not calling a lawyer. You are going to stay exactly where you are. But I can't, he shrieked. I can't handle the system. I smiled, a cold expression reflected in the glass. Actually, I think you will do just fine. You always hated the central banking system. You always preached about how fiat currency was trash and how we needed a new economy. Well, congratulations. You are in a place where cash is useless. It is a barter economy now, Kyle. Ramen noodles and cigarettes are the new Bitcoin. It is the ultimate decentralized market. You should be happy. It is exactly what you always wanted. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't want to hear his screams or his curses. I pressed the red button ending the call. The silence of the library returned heavy and peaceful. I blocked the number, set the phone down, and turned my attention back to the renovation plans. The kitchen needed new tiles, and unlike Kyle, I intended to pay for them with real money. The Range Rover pulled up to the curb, but there was no valet waiting to open the door. There were no manicured hedges, no marble fountains, and certainly no gates to keep the outside world at bay. We had arrived at the Oaks at West End, a name that sounded pastoral and serene, but belonged to a squat beige concrete block building on the edge of the industrial district. This was a state-funded assisted living facility, the end of the line for the indigent and the destitute. It was the only option left for a woman with a credit score of 400 assets to her name. Patricia looked out the tinted window, her eyes widening in horror. Kendra, she whispered, her hand gripping the leather armrest. What is this place? Why are we stopping here? This looks like a prison. I turned off the engine and looked at her. It is not a prison, Mom. It is a nursing home. It is fully licensed by the state. I filled out the Medicaid paperwork for you myself. It took 3 days to get you a bed. You should be grateful. There is usually a 6-month waiting list. I stepped out and walked around to open her door. The air smelled faintly of exhaust fumes and industrial laundry detergent. Patricia refused to move. I am not going in there, she declared, crossing her arms like a petulant child. Take me to the Golden Horizon, the one with the garden and the chef. My friend Barbara lives there. I leaned into the car, my patience finally exhausted. Barbara lives there because Barbara didn't forge her husband's signature to steal equity. Barbara didn't wire her entire retirement fund to a crypto scammer. The Golden Horizon costs $8,000 a month. You have exactly $40 in your bank account. Get out of the car. We walked through the sliding glass doors into a lobby that smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. The linoleum floor was scuffed, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing flicker. An orderly pushed a cart of rattling trays past us, not bothering to make eye contact. I led my mother to the admission desk, where a tired-looking nurse handed me a clipboard. While I signed the forms transferring guardianship of her care to the state, Patricia looked around, trembling. We walked down hallway C. It was narrow and crowded with equipment. I stopped at room 304 and pushed the door open. It was not a private suite. It was a small room divided by a thin beige curtain. On the far side, an elderly woman was coughing wet hacking sounds that filled the cramped space. This is it, I said, placing Patricia's small suitcase on the single narrow bed. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my coat. You can't leave me here, Kendra. I am your mother. I raised you in luxury. I deserve dignity. Look at this place. I will catch a disease. Please, just pay for the private home. You have the house now. You have the money. I gently peeled her fingers off my sleeve. I have the house because I bought it, I corrected her. And I have money because I work. You had a pension, Mom. You had a paid-off estate. You had security. You chose to set it all on fire because you thought Kyle was a genius, and I was just a worker bee. Well, this is what the worker bee's taxes pay for. I turned to leave. Patricia sat on the thin mattress, sobbing into her hands, the sound mixing with the coughing of her new roommate. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't promise to visit. I simply walked out down the scuffed hallway past the smell of cabbage and despair. I had balanced the ledger. She was finally living the life she could afford. The bright yellow industrial dumpster sitting in the center of the driveway was not an eyesore to me. It was a vessel of purification. At 7 in the morning, a crew of 6 contractors arrived, their work boots heavy on the pavement, ready to undo the damage my family had inflicted on this estate. I stood on the porch with Mike, the general contractor, holding a set of rolled-up blueprints. These were not new designs. They were the original architectural plans my father had commissioned 30 years ago. I want everything that isn't on these pages removed, I told Mike, handing him the schematics. If it looks like it was bought at a discount home decor store or glued on with cheap adhesive, tear it out. The demolition began in the south wing, which Ebony had commandeered as her content creation studio. She had painted the classic wainscoting, a blinding shade of millennial pink, and installed a wall of stick-on mirrors that distorted reflections like a carnival funhouse. I watched with deep satisfaction as a worker took a sledgehammer to the drywall. The first swing cracked the mirror down the center. The second swing brought the entire tacky installation crashing down in a shower of glass and drywall dust. The room was stripped down to the studs, erasing the backdrop of 1,000 lies she had told her followers. Next was the dining room. Patricia had replaced the original iron light fixtures with a monstrosity of a chandelier, faux gold plastic crystals that she claimed were Italian imports, but were actually from a liquidation warehouse. When the electricians cut the wire, it fell into the dumpster with a hollow plastic clatter. The cheap laminate flooring they had laid over the original hardwoods was ripped up, peeling away like dead skin, to reveal the sturdy, beautiful oak beneath. But the most important project was the library. My father's study. For the last 2 years, Patricia and Kyle had turned it into a storage unit for their failed schemes. It was piled high with boxes of unsold multi-level marketing vitamins and unsold crypto mining rigs that were gathering dust. I had the crew haul every single box to the trash. When the room was finally empty, the air still smelled stale, but the potential was there. I walked over to the built-in bookshelves. The wood was scratched and neglected, but the structure was sound. I ran my hand along the desk, the heavy mahogany desk, where my father had taught me how to balance a checkbook. I instructed the carpenters to sand everything down. We were going to stain it back to the original dark walnut. We were going to replace the carpet with hardwood. As the sound of saws and drills filled the house, drowning out the ghosts of arguments and manipulation, I felt a profound sense of order returning. I wasn't just renovating a house, I was performing an exorcism. And for the first time in years, the house could finally breathe. The sun began to set over the Buckhead estate, casting long golden shadows across the freshly manicured lawn. The yellow dumpster was gone, hauled away along with the debris of the last decade. The house behind me was no longer a stage for drama. It was silent, smelling of fresh paint and polished walnut. I sat on the wide front porch, the swing creaking softly in the cool evening breeze. In my hand, I held a glass of a vintage Cabernet, the kind my father used to save for victories. Today, it tasted like freedom. I looked down the driveway past the restored iron gates. Parked there, gleaming under the twilight, was my new purchase. It was a Porsche Panamera, jet black and terrifyingly sleek. I didn't buy it to stunt on Instagram. I didn't buy it to impress the neighbors who had whispered about us for years. I bought it because I earned it. It was registered, insured, and fully paid for. It was a symbol of a life that was finally completely mine. The silence out here was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, my phone was not blowing up with frantic demands. There were no calls from Kyle begging for bail money to cover his crypto losses. There were no texts from Ebony asking to borrow a dress she would inevitably ruin. There was no guilt-tripping voicemail from Patricia, feigning a heart attack to get a credit card payment. They were all exactly where their choices had led them. Kyle in a cell, Ebony in a diner, and Patricia in a facility that matched her budget. People love to say that family is everything. They preach that blood is thicker than water, that you should endure theft, abuse, and betrayal simply because you share a genetic code. They tell you that turning your back on your kin is the ultimate sin. I took a slow sip of the wine, letting the rich tannins settle on my tongue. I disagree. Family is supposed to be a foundation, not an anchor. It is supposed to be a shelter, not a trap. My father built this legacy to protect us, but my mother and her favorites treated it like a carcass to be scavenged. When a limb becomes gangrenous, you don't keep it attached out of sentimentality. You amputate it to save the body. I didn't destroy my family. I audited it. I looked at the liabilities, the toxic assets, and the fraudulent entries, and I made the necessary corrections. Some might call me cold. The church ladies certainly do. But as I watched the first stars appear above the roof of the house, that now legally bore only my name, I felt no regret. I didn't lose a family. I simply exterminated the parasites. And for the first time in my life, the balance sheet is finally clean. The most profound lesson from Kendra's story is that boundaries are the highest form of self-respect. We are often conditioned to believe that family comes first, and that loyalty means endless sacrifice. However, this sentiment can easily become a weapon used by manipulators to extract resources and emotional labor without consequence. Kendra's journey proves that looking at relationships through a logical lens, much like a forensic audit, can reveal the critical difference between a loved one in genuine need and a parasite practicing calculated exploitation. Generosity without boundaries is not charity, it is self-destruction. You cannot save people who are determined to drill holes in their own hull, and you are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. By cutting off the financial supply to her toxic relatives, Kendra didn't just save her house. She reclaimed her life. It serves as a powerful reminder that no is a complete sentence, and that financial literacy is the ultimate defense against emotional manipulation. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt like the worker bee carrying the weight of ungrateful people, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your peace? Let's discuss it.